Imagine standing at the beach, and instead of that deep blue water stretching to the horizon, you see a shimmering sea of soda. Not water, not salt, but billions upon billions of liters of fizzy, sugary, carbonated drink bubbling under the sun. You take a breath, and even from far away you can smell it. Sweet, sharp, sticky. Now pause for a second and really picture it. The waves roll in, not clear and foamy, but brown, or orange, or neon green. The surface crackles with tiny popping bubbles. The air hisses constantly, like someone opened 1,000 soda cans at once. It sounds ridiculous, but stay with me. Because once you get past the funny image, it becomes something else. Something massive. Let's start with the obvious question. Could you even swim in it? At first you might think, sure, liquid is liquid, right? But soda isn't just water. It's water loaded with sugar, flavoring, and carbon dioxide gas. That gas is what makes it fizzy. Those tiny bubbles are constantly trying to escape. Now imagine diving into that. The moment you jump in, it wouldn't feel like the ocean. It would feel heavier, slightly thicker. Your skin would instantly feel sticky, not just wet. Sticky. And the bubbles? They wouldn't gently tickle like in a glass. They'd surround you, rush past your ears, crawl across your face, slip into your nose. You would hear fizzing underwater, a constant crackling sound, like static. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Soda is way denser than normal seawater because of the sugar. That actually means you'd float more easily, kind of like floating in the Dead Sea. So swimming wouldn't be graceful, it would be awkward. You'd bob on the surface coated in syrupy foam, the sun baking that sugar under your skin, and after a few minutes, your eyes would burn badly. Soda is acidic, not strong enough to melt you, of course, but enough to irritate your eyes, especially in massive, unending contact. You'd come out red-eyed, sticky, and smelling like a vending machine. But that's just you. Let's zoom out. Because oceans aren't just places we swim. They're alive. Right now, Earth's oceans cover more than 70% of the planet. They regulate temperature, they absorb carbon dioxide, they hold ecosystems so complex we still haven't discovered all of them. Now replace all of that with soda. Every fish, every coral reef, every microscopic plankton, gone. Fish can't survive in syrupy, acidic liquid loaded with sugar. Their gills are designed for saltwater, not carbonation. The first thing that would happen, mass extinction. Within hours, marine life would suffocate or go into shock. Coral reefs would dissolve under the altered chemistry. The entire marine food chain would collapse from the bottom up. No plankton means no small fish. No small fish means no big fish. No big fish means no whales. And that doesn't stay in the ocean. It comes back to us. Because the ocean produces over half of the oxygen you breathe. Tiny organisms, phytoplankton, quietly pump oxygen into the atmosphere every single day. Without them, the air slowly changes. At first you wouldn't notice. A few months go by, maybe even a year. But oxygen levels would begin to drop. Forests would struggle, animals would adapt or die. The balance we rely on, the one we barely think about, would tilt. And then there's the smell. We're talking about trillions of gallons of soda sitting under the sun. Sugar doesn't just sit politely. It ferments. Bacteria would explode in growth. The surface would start to rot. Not in a dramatic movie way, slowly, thick patches forming, darkening. The smell would shift from sweet to sour to something you can't quite describe but desperately want to escape. Coastal cities would be unbearable. Now imagine a storm. Hurricanes form because of warm ocean water. They pull energy from evaporation. But soda doesn't evaporate like pure water. Sugar changes everything. The evaporation rate would slow down. Storm systems would behave differently, maybe weaker in some areas, stronger in others. Rain would change too. Think about that. When ocean water evaporates, it leaves salt behind and forms clouds. If soda evaporates, the water would rise. But what about all those dissolved sugars and chemicals? Most of it would stay behind. But the air would be thick with odd residues, cloud formation would shift, rainfall patterns would become unpredictable. Agriculture would collapse in places that rely on consistent rainfall. And let's talk about beaches. You know how sand sticks to you a little when you're wet? Now imagine sand sticking to you because you're coated in syrup. Every shoreline becomes a glue trap. Seagulls land once and struggle to lift off. Their feathers would clump together. Flight would become harder. Some wouldn't make it. Turtles trying to hatch and crawl toward the ocean, they'd meet a carbonated wall of sticky liquid that burns their eyes and gums up their shells. Even the sound of the coast would change. No soothing crash of waves. Instead, a thick sloshing churn, foam piling high, bubbles popping constantly. It wouldn't feel peaceful. It would feel restless. And then there's shipping. Cargo ships crossing oceans every day would have to push through denser liquid. Engines would strain. Hulls would corrode faster because soda is acidic. Global trade would slow. Oil rigs, they'd be sitting in a sugary chemical bath. Metal wouldn't last long. Now think bigger. Oceans help regulate Earth's temperature by absorbing heat and redistributing it through currents. The Gulf Stream, for example, keeps parts of Europe warmer than they should be for their latitude. Change the density and chemistry of the oceans, and those currents collapse. Some regions freeze, others overheat. Weather patterns shift dramatically, all because the planet's largest system of balance was replaced with something we usually sip through a straw. And here's a strange twist. For a brief moment, beaches might look beautiful. Imagine sunset reflecting off a perfectly caramel-colored sea, bubbles glowing gold in the light. It would look almost magical until you step closer, until you smell it, until you realize the silence of missing wildlife. No dolphins breaking the surface, no schools of fish flashing under the waves, just fizz, constant fizz, and the unsettling knowledge that something essential is gone. And we haven't even talked about what would happen to drinking water yet. But that's where this really starts to hit home. Because oceans aren't just out there. They're connected to everything, including the glass of water you had this morning. We'll go there next. Let's bring it closer. Right now, when you turn on your tap, that water probably started its journey in the ocean. It evaporated, rose into the sky, formed clouds, traveled, fell as rain, collected in rivers and lakes, filtered naturally through rock and soil. It's a quiet cycle, reliable, ancient. Now picture that cycle starting from soda. When the sun heats a soda ocean, the water inside it would still evaporate. The sugar and most of the chemicals would stay behind. So technically, clouds would still form from relatively pure water vapor. But here's the catch. Without healthy oceans, the climate becomes unstable. Rain wouldn't fall where it used to. Some regions would face endless drought. Others would flood unpredictably. Freshwater systems depend on balance, and balance would be gone. Countries that already struggle with water shortages would be hit first. Crops would fail. Food prices would spike. Entire populations would migrate in search of stable conditions. All because the planet's thermostat and water engine stopped working properly. Now, let's talk about temperature. Oceans are like giant heat batteries. They absorb sunlight during the day and release it slowly over time. That's why coastal cities usually have milder climates than inland areas. Soda changes that. Sugar alters how heat is stored and transferred. The density shifts. Ocean currents weaken or stop. Instead of distributing warmth around the globe, heat would stay trapped in some areas. Summers would become brutal. Winters in certain regions could become shockingly cold. Imagine London dealing with temperatures like northern Canada, or parts of the U.S. East Coast freezing far beyond what they're built for. Air conditioning systems overwhelmed in one hemisphere, heating systems overwhelmed in another, energy demand would skyrocket. Now think about wildlife on land. Millions of species rely indirectly on the ocean. Birds feed on fish, bears feed on salmon. Entire ecosystems ripple outward from what happens offshore. With the oceans dead, that ripple becomes a shockwave. Coastal economies collapse first. Fishing industries vanish overnight. No seafood markets, no fishermen heading out before dawn, no bustling docks at sunrise. Tourism follows. Who wants to vacation next to a fermenting soda sea? Hotels empty, restaurants close, small businesses disappear. And then comes something you probably didn't expect. Insects. All that sugar, all that warmth, all that bacterial activity. Coastal areas would become paradise for flies, mosquitoes, and every microorganism that thrives on fermentation. The air would hum, but not with seabirds, with swarms. Diseases would spread more easily in dense coastal populations already stressed by economic collapse. Hospitals would feel it. Now imagine a child building a sand castle at this soda beach. They dig their hands into the wet shoreline. Their fingers come up coated in syrup and foam. Ants swarm instantly. The structure collapses under sticky weight. It's a small image, but it says everything. Even simple joys would feel wrong. And what about ships and submarines? Navies depend on predictable ocean behavior. Sonar systems rely on how sound travels through saltwater. Change the chemistry, and sound moves differently. Communication underwater becomes unreliable. Military strategies shift. Global tensions rise in uncertain environments. And oil spills? Here's something strange. Oil and soda wouldn't mix the same way oil and saltwater do. Cleanup efforts would be far more complicated. Sticky, acidic liquid interacting with petroleum would create new environmental nightmares. And then there's marine archaeology. Shipwrecks that have rested quietly for centuries would begin to corrode faster. Artifacts lost to time would dissolve in sugary acid. History itself would slowly erode. Let's zoom even further out. Earth from space. Right now, astronauts describe our planet as a blue marble, deep, rich blue. Now imagine that color replaced with brown or artificial green. Clouds drifting over something that looks less like a life support system and more like a spilled drink. It changes how we see ourselves, because that blue isn't just color. It's stability, it's oxygen, it's food, it's climate control. Without functioning oceans, humanity would face pressure unlike anything in history. And here's the irony. At first, people might celebrate. Free soda, someone would joke. Companies would rush to harvest it. Tankers trying to process it, factories attempting to filter out sugar and chemicals for reuse. But scale matters. We're talking about over 1.3 billion cubic kilometers of liquid. You can't bottle that. And even if you could, the sugar concentration would eventually dilute through rain and runoff. Chemical breakdown would change the flavor quickly. It wouldn't stay the soda you recognize. Under sunlight, ingredients degrade, artificial coloring fades, carbonation escapes. Within weeks, the ocean wouldn't look like your favorite drink anymore. It would look like a vast, flat, decaying chemical soup. The fizz would calm. The bubbles would thin. The surface would darken. And slowly, the planet would feel quieter. Not peaceful. Empty. Because oceans aren't just water. They're movement, sound, migration, breathing tides. Replace that with soda, and you don't just swap liquids. You erase a heartbeat, and yet, there's one more layer to this. One that makes this thought experiment even more unsettling. Because the real question isn't whether we could survive soda oceans. It's whether we're already changing our real oceans in ways that aren't so different. But before we go there, there's something else we need to imagine. What happens to us physically if we're surrounded by soda for the long term? That's where it gets personal. Let's say somehow we adapt. Cities are rebuilt, coastal barriers go up. Technology scrambles to compensate for everything we've lost. But you still live on a planet where the horizon is soda. What does that do to you? First, the air. Remember all that fermentation, all that sugar breaking down under heat and bacteria? It releases gases, carbon dioxide, methane in some areas, other byproducts we really don't want in large amounts. Coastal air would feel heavier, sour, sharp in your throat. On humid days, it would almost taste sweet when you breathe in. Not pleasant sweet, rotting sweet. People with asthma, they'd struggle more. Elderly lungs would feel it first. Kids running outside would come home coughing. Now imagine rainfall after weeks of evaporation from a soda sea. Even if the water vapor rises mostly pure, trace compounds would still find their way into the atmosphere. Rain might feel slightly different on your skin, leave faint residue on windows. Cars would need constant washing, buildings would stain faster, metal would corrode. Daily life becomes maintenance. And psychologically, that might be the strangest part. Water is calming. There's a reason people sit by oceans to think, to breathe, to feel small in a comforting way. But soda doesn't carry that same emotion. You wouldn't look at a fizzing brown horizon and feel peace. You'd feel unease. The constant hiss of bubbles, the lack of marine life, no distant splash of a fish, no diving birds, no rhythm of tides that feel ancient and steady, just chemical motion. Over time, that changes culture. Songs about the sea disappear. Seafood cuisine becomes history. Coastal traditions fade into stories grandparents tell. Back when the water was blue, that sentence alone would feel heavy. Children would grow up never seeing a coral reef, never hearing whales sing underwater, never watching a clear wave curl before crashing. And that absence would shape how they see nature. Because here's something important. We connect to what feels alive, and soda doesn't feel alive. It feels manufactured, artificial. Now think about global health long term. With fisheries
Quiet
gone,
day.
protein
Yes, but
sources
peaceful.
I'll
shrink.
take a look.
Nations that rely heavily on seafood would scramble for alternatives. Factory farming would expand, putting even more strain on land resources. Deforestation increases, carbon levels rise further, climate instability accelerates. It becomes a chain reaction. And here's the quiet twist in all of this. If oceans were made of soda, it wouldn't be dramatic in the way movies show disasters. No single explosion, no giant wave wiping everything out at once. It would be slower. Systems failing quietly, food chains collapsing, weather patterns drifting off course, economies bending, then breaking. Humanity wouldn't vanish overnight. We'd adapt, we always try to, but the world would feel smaller, harsher, less forgiving. And now, here's the part that makes this thought experiment hit differently. We don't have soda oceans, but we are changing the chemistry of our real ones. Warmer temperatures, rising acidity from excess carbon dioxide, plastic drifting where plankton once thrived. It's not syrup, but it is a shift. And the reason imagining soda oceans feels so disturbing is because, deep down, you understand how much we rely on that blue stability. You understand that the ocean isn't just scenery. It's infrastructure. It's oxygen production. It's climate control. It's food. It's culture. It's balance. Replace it with something artificial and sweet, and everything unravels. So maybe this strange question isn't really about soda. Maybe it's about perspective, about realizing how perfectly tuned this planet already is. Because when you imagine standing at the shore, looking out at a world of fizz instead of waves, Something inside you resists it. It feels wrong. And that feeling? That's awareness. The next time you see the ocean, even in a photo, notice the color, the depth, the movement. Notice how normal it feels, how guaranteed it seems, and remember that it doesn't have to be. We live on a planet balanced by details we rarely think about. Currents we can't see, microscopic organisms we'll never meet, cycles that have been running long before us. That blue horizon isn't just beautiful. It's working, quietly, constantly, for you. And maybe that's enough reason to look at it a little differently the next time you do. If this made you pause for a moment, hold on to that. Curiosity is where care begins. I'll see you in the next one.